Well, hey everyone, happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. Today on the show, we are talking about out-of-the-box attribution models. So a lot of times the topics that we cover, sometimes the feedback we get is that, it's really interesting information, but it's unattainable because, it requires special software or skill sets, around like development and coding and advanced analytics. And so we also wanted to make sure we're covering topics that, are a little bit more accessible to the majority of marketers. And so today we're covering out of the box attribution model, which is low to no cost because it's literally out of the box. If you have Google Analytics using the free version, you have access to all of these free analytics attribution models. So Chris, where do we want to start?
Well, I think it's actually important to say that these models are shared among different pieces of software. So Google Analytics has many of these off-the-shelf models. They share a common heritage with Google Ads. So you'll see them when you're running Google Ads. You are actually asked when you're setting up a campaign to choose an attribution model for your campaign. And even Facebook, when you're building out your Facebook analytics for your Facebook campaigns, it also asks you to specify an attribution model. So these common models are pretty standard, and they're not terrible for the most part. Some of them are good enough to get by until you can spend some more time digging into the data. So probably what would make sense to start with are what the heck are all these different models, because there's a bunch of them. So Katie, do you want to talk through a couple of the different more obvious ones? I'll bring up here our attribution project in Google Analytics, and you can see right on the screen here some of these different ones. You want to start off with like what a couple of these are and why you would use them?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you don't have to be in the attribution project. So Chris, I think you're in Google Analytics 4, is that correct?
3.
Okay. Oh, okay, so you're still in 3. In Google Analytics 3, you have access to not only an attribution project, which we do recommend you set up, but also just the general attribution modeling that's out of the box. So Chris, you're looking at this in the attribution project. If you don't have an attribution project set up, you can still access these attribution models through the main navigation on the left-hand side of your main view. It's the model comparison tool. And so there's a handful of different models right out of the box. So you've probably heard first touch, last touch. So in Google Analytics, it's called first interaction, last interaction. And one of the things to note, I like to give this little pro tip, this little cheat, is that if you look at the icons for each of the attribution models, then you can actually see where the credit is going to be given. And essentially an attribution model is just that. It tells you what gets credit for the action being taken. So a first touch or a last touch is really good for a very transactional website that doesn't have a lot of pages on it. So there's not a lot of, other calls to action other than buy this thing or contact us now. And so if it's very singularly focused, and you don't have a very large mix of marketing channels, if you're a smaller business and you really only use maybe email marketing and social, then a first and last touch interaction might be really good. And what comes to mind, John, is actually the Marketing Over Coffee website. It's fairly straightforward. It's fairly simple. And there's really only one, maybe 2 things you can do from that website. And I know that you use email marketing and you use a little bit of social. And so it probably makes sense for where you are, if you're looking for a free version of an attribution model, to use either a first or a last touch model. A lot of companies make the mistake of using a first or a last touch. A lot of times it's the last touch, especially if it's a larger company and they have a large mix of digital channels. What ends up happening is it doesn't matter what happened prior to that last touch gets all the credit. And then if you're trying to resource, you're unbalanced. So you can use first and last touch. It's not the greatest if you're a larger company using a lot of digital channels. Even if you're a smaller company using a lot of different digital channels, it's not really going to tell you what's working. It's just going to tell you the very last thing or the very first thing that somebody saw. So it doesn't give you the full picture. Another one of the standard models is what's called a linear model. So regardless of, where in the process or how many times or the different mix, every single thing that led up to that specific action gets the exact same credit. So you don't know if Facebook is working harder than email or if your display ads are working harder than your organic social. You just don't know. So everything gets the exact same amount of credit. We don't have a really good use case for this one unless you're really just working against a lot of, internal infighting and bureaucracy and red tape. This might actually be something to just sort of like at least start to get people moving in the same direction of, hey, look, you guys are all important. Just have that conversation with people. Time decay is probably one of the better models to use if you're using an out-of-the-box attribution and if you are using a good, healthy mix of digital channels. Because what it does is essentially what it sounds like. It decays the credit over time for whatever it is that has led up to that specific action. And these actions that we're talking about, those are goals. So the goals are the goals that you set up. Contact us, download a paper, subscribe to a newsletter, certain amount of scroll depth on a page. The goals really vary depending on the type of business. And so you also want to make sure you're matching up the model to the kind of business that you have. The other one, position-based, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure in the sense that you can determine how much credit you want something to give. So if you double down really heavily on email marketing and then only occasionally do social, you can then determine, say, I want to give email marketing 2 times the credit of social all the time. And so you can sort of set those parameters. So that, there's a little bit of customization there, which is good. But if you're just looking for a straight, our best recommendation for out of the box attribution, we would recommend time decay.
One of the things to keep in mind with a lot of these things is you want to have a sense of what's happening in your data and like how long the path to conversion is, because the longer the path to conversion, the more complex a model you need. To what Katie was saying, if you have somebody who just comes in, clicks on something, buys it, and they're done, yeah, first touch or last touch is perfectly fine. So if you were to go into Google Analytics into an attribution project, you need to set this up and you need at least 30 days worth of data. So, and it's based on your existing Google Analytics goals. So if you haven't done all that stuff, that's a prerequisite. But then you go to your conversion path length here and you look to see how long is the path to conversion. How many touch points to conversion does it take? So this is my personal website. I would actually be okay with the first touch model because 90% of my revenue and 85% of my conversions are one and dones. They come in, they do the thing, and they leave. Right. So in this case, this would be a business where, yeah, it probably would make sense to use a last touch model because, it's pretty quick. On the other hand, if this was like 70% or 60% or 40%, and you had more of a curve of conversions, going out pretty far, then yeah, you definitely want a more complex model to deal with the fact that there are all these different touch points that are happening. So one of the tips that we suggest is you look at your conversion path length and say, how long does it take to convert somebody? Now, the other thing you have to ask yourself is, if your conversion path is really long, especially for something that isn't a complex sale, then you got to ask yourself why and go, our conversion pathway seems to be really, really, really long. We're just trying to get people to sign up for an email. Like, what is it about our site or our offering or whatever that sucks so much that nobody wants? It takes like 20 touches to convince them to buy something.
And now, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe with these out-of-the-box models, you're restricted down to 90 days in terms of what they're going to look at. So if your sales cycle is longer than 90 days, or, Chris, to your point, if it takes someone longer than 90 days to make a decision to subscribe to your email, you're not going to get really good information because Google isn't looking at the data beyond that time frame.
That's exactly right. There's a 90-day window in Google Analytics for all this stuff. If you have a process that is longer than 90 days, you need to be encoding that data in your CRM. So each touch point as happens, and then you have to build a custom model from your CRM data instead. We have a couple of clients that do that, where some of their touch points are a couple of years long, and so they have this longitudinal data that they use to build those models instead, and that's the workaround.
So, John, I'm going to keep putting you on the spot because, it's fun. You talk with a lot of prospects and customers around attribution modeling and those questions that they have. What are the kinds of questions that people are asking that leads you to say, I think you need an attribution model?
Yeah, well, everybody wants to just get to the holy grail of like being told that, okay, look, you just need to put all your money on these 3 marketing programs here and you'll triple your business, next quarter. And that's great. And unfortunately, there's like a million gremlins hiding beneath the surface, beneath the surface of this thing, because there's so many things that can happen. A big thing that people need to address up front is, do we care about awareness? Because for some companies, really, it's just about awareness. It's just about getting them to know you're there, and then you trust your sales process that, yeah, so if they've showed up and come in the door, sooner or later, they are going to buy. So it is really that first touch. And then at the other end of the spectrum is like, yeah, no, there's a lot of people milling around, but unless like they hit the pricing page and, maybe they take this survey, they're never going to be a customer. So those are, tend to shift towards later stage. And then the other thing that gets messy with, complicated sales is how when you attribute those percentages, making sure that those match back to revenue. And sometimes that's even account based. You may have 5 people doing things that all attribute back to one deal. And the stereotypical mess, when we see a senior management come to us with this, it's always the CEO is like, well, marketing said, they attribute 2.8 million in deals this year, and we, our net revenue was 1.3 million. So obviously something is very wrong here. and they're right, because stuff keeps getting attributed back, and you don't want to end up at the other end of the spectrum where you're running these models and like every marketing program is contributing, $4.38, and you don't know what to cut or where to double down because nothing seems to, be the silver bullet. So yeah, there's so much going on between having your data right and then is it, awareness versus closed deals, and how do you roll in all the data, and then you hit the other one with timeframes too. I mean, it's insane. You'll see a deal where, yeah, you dig and dig and dig, and you find out that, oh yeah, Bob worked with Susan 8 years ago at this place. Like that's actually how they knew about this, and that's not going to get covered in the model. So you need to work around all that kind of stuff.
So, Chris, I think it would be helpful. So we're looking at the model comparison tool, and again, if you have Google Analytics set up, you have access to this exact same view. So can we walk through what people are seeing on the screen? Like, what are they looking for? What do the different, toggles mean? What do they do?
So the model comparison tool is really to understand your data and understand how to attribute credit for different kinds of models. And what you're looking for are, A, is the model that best describes your business, and B, based on that, how does it differ from, say, a traditional last touch or first touch model? So let's go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to first set the look back window to crank up to 90 days, because I do know that I'm a B2B website. It's my personal website, but it is a B2B site for the most part. And so the longer conversion window makes more sense, because some people may see a tweet 2 months ago and I've gotten cookied in. So that's the first part. The longer the window, the more you'll have things like assisted conversions and multiple channel touches, because there's more opportunities for people to interact with you. The shorter that window is, the less stuff you'll have there. Again, if we were to look back at that path length stuff, either in this tool, or you can actually do it within time lag right here in the multi-channel funnels menu, you can see, yeah, some for if you restrict your model down to 3 or 4 days, it's going to look a lot more like a last touch model, because there's just not enough data to give you those assists. So next thing we want to do is choose what kind of conversions that we actually want to be modeling. In this case, I have e-commerce on my site. People can buy my book and stuff there. They can also buy our Data Science 101 workshop, which you can find at trustinsights.ai/datascience101. And there's also non-financial transactions. So newsletter subscription, Amazon engagement, people visiting my speaking page, and so on and so forth. For this, let's just go and choose, let's select none, and let's go with let's go with newsletter subscriptions. I think that's a good one. I'm going to crank up the time period here to actually look at the last 90 days. Otherwise, it's kind of silly to have a 90-day look back window. And what we should see is the last touch model that says, these are the channels that have helped conversions. So direct traffic, which is unknown, is 34% of the conversions in the last touch model. 24% was organic search, 22% referral traffic, 11% email, and social networks 6%. Now, my next step would be, okay, what if we want to compare it to, as you were saying earlier, okay, a time decay model where you distribute credit over time. What's the difference? And what you'll see here is a percentage change in conversions. Some things are more important in a time decay model than they are in a last touch model, which means that there's a difference in how users are interacting. For example, referral traffic is 5% more important in a time decay model than a last touch model. It means that in a time decay model, there may be some things happening earlier on in their interactions that do yield more conversions. Now, what do we do with this information? Well, in a time decay model, especially, we want to look at what are the percentages of conversions by channel, right? And then ask ourselves, are we allocating resources appropriately to match those conversions? So let's say I'm trying to build my newsletter list here, and I've invested, 80% of my marketing budget in Facebook, right? I'm going to go all in on Facebook and try and grow my list from Facebook. If I were to do that and say 80% of my budget's going there and 6% of my results came from there, I've got a pretty big mismatch, right? I'd say that's I've clearly done something wrong. And so I would know, well, in this case, maybe I need to rebalance what it is that I'm doing. Or if I am going on, if I'm looking at investing in my SEO team, and my SEO team, I've got resourced, 5% of the marketing budget, but it's generating 23% of the conversions. Like, I need to resource more into SEO because organic search is working for me. So that's what you do with a lot of these models is to, look at the comparisons, look at the different performance of the models, and then decide, am I resourced appropriately? And are there any surprises? Is there something here you're like, I didn't expect to see that? Like in this case, for newsletter conversions, I didn't expect referral traffic to be that big contributor.
And so then, you would have to dig into, which sites are referring, and does it make sense? And so, Chris, you just walked through probably the most common scenario as to why using any kind of an attribution model is useful to your marketing, because the question of where do I put my money, what resources do I need, and what's working, like that's the most common question we get is, how do I budget for this? Where should I put the money? I was just given $100,000 for the next quarter. What do I do with it? So number one is making sure that you have your tracking set up correctly for all of, whatever campaigns you're running or whatever the actions are on your website. And then number two is using some kind of an attribution model, unless you're a B2C and just a straight e-commerce site, probably, a time decay, looking at that 90-day look back window is going to be your best bet. And so if you do see that surprise, that Chris mentioned, so let's say referral traffic is just killing it for you, you can look at your attribution model in the form of source medium. And so Chris can start to see here, okay, what is referring, to my website that is then, causing people to take the action I want them to.
Yep, exactly. So number 4, Elegant Themes, the Elegant Themes affiliate program is actually sending traffic to my site, which doesn't make sense because I should be sending traffic to them so that people buy their stuff. So I have to, that's a mystery for me to go solve. Medium.com, converting traffic to my site, which is amusing and ironic because I got banned from Medium for spamming. Whoops. T.co is a miscode in this case. So this is Twitter traffic, but because of the way Twitter does its source medium, it will always come into Google Analytics as referral traffic. And you can't fix that. That's just the way it is. You can change in Google Analytics through which channel grouping it's in, and we do that for our clients, but you cannot you literally cannot fix the data itself. You can fix it in Google Analytics 4, but it's very dangerous to do that. But yeah, so Twitter traffic is 3% there. A website, I can't remember her first name, but this is a marketing blogger, about 2% of my traffic. So my next steps here, oh, look, hey, YouTube. Oh, that's nice.
Well, you have LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter, all of which are social.
Exactly, all of which is social media. So now my next step is to go, okay, I've got converting traffic sources in my out of the box attribution model. Maybe I should be focusing a little bit more on some of these things. So one of the questions that I asked myself at the beginning of 2021 was, should I discontinue my daily YouTube show? Right, and I actually stopped it in December because it didn't seem to be converting. And it was the right choice, and it still is the right choice, because even with almost 3 years of daily shows up on YouTube, it's still referring only 1% of my conversions, right? Am I going to, if I have 45 minutes in the day to, that I allocate to myself to write content, to create content, should I be putting in the channel that converts at 1%? Or should I be writing blog posts in the channel that converts at 22%, which is organic search? The answer obviously is I should be making good blog content instead, and feed the organic search piece. And so that's what I did. But from here, I can look at this and go, what things are surprises? What things make sense? What things should I maybe stop doing? Because investment isn't just budget, it's also time. Like, we only have 24 hours in the day. So where should I be putting my time? Based on this, I should be putting my time in SEO, email, and then maybe outreach to maybe some social media.
I was going to ask, I hadn't thought about it this way before, but looking at the way the time decay runs, if all campaigns were considered equal, can you consider this your funnel? I mean, because it's the stuff that's scoring the lowest, obviously, is earliest in the cycle. Or is that too far a stretch? Are most clients not? It's more the campaigns suck.
It's the campaigns suck. This is not a timing thing. What you do see a difference in the time, compared to the last touch. If the conversion number is lower, it means that it probably is a little earlier in the process than it is. But you can't get timing out of this. You'd want to use like a machine learning attribution model to get the exact timing.
Makes sense. So Chris, there's a couple of other toggles that you haven't walked through. So one is right above the last interaction time decay. Right now it says conversion and CPA. Is that the two correct columns to be looking at? Considering is the CPA more appropriate if you're looking at Google Ads, or is it appropriate for this view?
It depends. It depends on what you guys set up. And for me, this makes no sense because I don't run ads. So right. Both CPA and ROAS are stupid to have here because I don't do ads. If I did ads, I would probably want to be investigating both those. In this case, I'll switch over to conversions and value because there are dollar amounts associated with a lot of these things. But if I was running Google Ads or anything where it had ad spend data being uploaded into Google Analytics, I could then look at this and say, okay, is the cost per acquisition where I want it to be? And am I getting a return on ad spend that's high enough to meet my goals? So if we flip over to conversion and return on ad spend, in this case, still all zeros because I haven't, but this is where you would start pulling out, industry basic rules. Like, for example, the sort of a general rule of thumb that your return on ad spend should never be below 400%, because return on ad spend is different than ROI. You're computing the cost of profit in return on ad spend. You're just computing, the return on ad spend directly. And so in order to make sure you do have positive ROI, most folks say, your target ROAS should be never less than 400%. So this would be a good way to check on that at the bottom of the funnel.
But so in this case, because you're not running any ads, really you should be looking at conversion
and value.
And value. Got it.
That's right.
So if you switch back over to conversion and value, then next to that, to the right of that, you have another drop down, which right now is percent change in conversion. You could also look at it as percent change in conversion value. And to be clear, these values that Chris is seeing, these dollar amounts, are based on the value that he has assigned to this specific goal. And we're looking at his newsletter sign up goal, and Chris has assigned, whether it's $1 or $10, that's, depending on what makes sense for his business, that's where those value amounts are coming from.
Yeah, we value newsletter subscribers basically being worth $1.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, John, if someone is really, they don't have the resources, they can't afford something advanced, something custom, and they're really, trying to make the most of an out-of-the-box attribution model, what are some of the other things that they could be doing to set themselves up for success?
The biggest thing is this: all of this is dependent on goals, right? So if your goals and goal values are not set up to be anything intelligent, none of this works. So there's a goal in here I have, speaking page visits, right? That's a pretty squishy goal. Now I set that up for my site because I just want to know how many people are visiting my speaking page to hire me to speak at events. But that's kind of a dumb goal, right? It should be like, speaking form fill requests, like somebody actually filled out the form of requests, because that could literally just be bots. That might not even be humans. So if you're going to spend time on attribution modeling, and you should, but 80% of your time should be on the goal and planning and upfront and the infrastructure to make sure it's all working. Because if none of that's working, this is all a pointless exercise.
Yeah, that's funny. See, I was going to come at that from a different side of saying, don't go crazy with your 100K budget looking at the model until you've also gone through and looked at all the goals and made sure that, this tracks. Because the last thing you want to be doing is throwing around all this money, and then you look behind the scenes and you're like, oh, actually, we only had 4 goal completions this year. So you're that total dartboard situation there. So, but yeah, obviously the whole thing is built on that stuff being mapped out correctly.
I would add to that, it's dependent on your goals being set up correctly, but it's also dependent on your Google Analytics system being set up correctly. And the advice that we always give is that Google Analytics infrastructure out of the box is set up incorrectly. And that's because of the channel groupings. And so out of the box, it's wrong. And so you would need to go into your settings and, resolve all of that, so as Chris showed the example, Twitter referral or LinkedIn referral, that's incorrect. And so you would want to include that information and make sure that social is set up correctly. The other one that we know right off the bat that's always set up incorrectly is email. For some reason, Gmail is not automatically categorized as email out of the box, even though it's in the same family of brands. It's all owned by Google. Why they do that, we don't know. So the other thing that we want to chat about a little bit, so we talked a lot about Google Analytics 3, which is where everyone should be right now. You should have your Google Analytics 3 system set up correctly. You should be confident in the data. And then in parallel, Google Analytics 4, it was released a few months ago. It's still working through some, new features. It doesn't have everything yet. We do recommend you set it up in parallel, but don't shut off your Google Analytics 3. If you want help with that, obviously reach out to us. So Chris, attribution modeling looks a little bit different in Google Analytics 4. What's going on there?
Well, for one thing, that whole thing about default channel groupings has been solved by Google because they're gone. Yeah, now you're stuck with the broken source medium, and there's no way of fixing it.
Well, that's a terrible idea.
Unless you go into Google Analytics 4 admin and you actually make in-stream modifications to your data stream. I generally don't recommend people do this unless you know what you're doing. But you can actually manipulate the raw data itself inside of Google Analytics 4 and make substantial changes to it. Again, not the kind of thing that you probably want to do, just on a whim. The second thing is for attribution modeling and which model to choose, Google has solved that too. It's gone. There is no attribution modeling in Google Analytics 4 at all. And the reason for that is that attribution modeling, as we've done it and been showing here, isn't part of Google Analytics. It's a reporting mechanism. It is not an analysis mechanism. And so Google, in its design philosophy around Google Analytics 4, has said that This is a business intelligence tool. This is an analysis tool. This is not a reporting tool, and they want you to do the reporting somewhere else. Typically, it would be Google Data Studio. Here's the catch. There is no attribution modeling in Google Data Studio for Google Analytics 4 either, which is kind of awkward. The best that you can do right now is cobble together two different types of mediums. There's user medium and session medium. And you can do a source medium combo. And what that will give you is essentially the first touch for a user and then the last touch for a conversion within that session. And so you sort of like get a first and last touch model in GA4. I'm hoping that the omission of attribution was an oversight in GA4. I'm hoping that it eventually does come into the analysis hub, because they do have some templates in here that are not bad. Attribution modeling, not one of them. Because there's no way to do it in Data Studio either. The only place that you can do attribution modeling, as we've been talking about it, is in the raw BigQuery data itself, which means you need to A, provision GA4 to be recording its data to BigQuery, and B, you then have to get the data out of BigQuery, which is a SQL database, and then process the data yourself to turn it into an attribution model. I was playing around with that earlier this week, getting set up to start pulling that data in and start building attribution models with GA4. It will be better than what's available in GA3 because you get 100% of your data, and it's really nice, but it's also inaccessible for the average user. The average user is not going to sit down and write code against the BigQuery API and extract stuff out. So I'm hoping that there will be something that Google puts together that allows us to do attribution modeling. Because right now, when you go in here and you look at your conversion events, let's see, I'll go do newsletter subscription. I can dig around and see like what was the event source and things like that. And you know, add a few columns here and there, but it's nothing even close yet to a real attribution model. Like there's just sort of the event campaign and medium. This is not super helpful stuff.
And you know, so everything you're describing is exactly why, even if you're setting up Google Analytics 4, we highly, highly, highly cannot emphasize enough: do not turn off Google Analytics 3. There's no penalty to having both of them running against your website. It doesn't slow things down, especially, you know, if you have it set up correctly through Tag Manager, you know, and so continue to use Google Analytics 3 until it's completely discontinued by Google, which we know in terms of these rollouts is going to be a couple of years, because as Chris is mentioning, there's a substantial amount of features missing. And so Google has been slowly rolling things out and adding onto it and upgrading, but by no means is it ready to replace Google Analytics 3.
Do you think that they'll roll something out in Data Studio perhaps? Or is this going to be one of those Google Reader things where it's like, yeah, it was good, but it doesn't fit the mission, so it's not going to be around anymore?
We don't know. I would imagine they will have to release something, because there are plenty of competitors to Google Analytics that would like to take a shot at the throne. And with the changes that are coming in advertising with ad tech and not being able to track certain things, Google Analytics, you know, and having it on individual websites will be one of Google's only ways to be able to see what's happening once a user leaves a Google ad and goes to a website, right? So without that, if their lack of, you know, attribution modeling causes people to switch analytics applications, it diminishes their ad system potential revenue as well. So there's a clearly financial interest for Google to maintain its visibility into millions of websites out there.
So as we start to wrap up, we've covered out-of-the-box attribution models from Google Analytics 3, the pros and cons and the use cases of each of those. You know, we've talked about which ones are appropriate depending on the type of business, and really our recommendation, you know, is generally using the time decay model. It is the out-of-the-box model that most closely mimics true user behavior, but really the only, you can't get good attribution modeling out of the box. You know, we would really recommend, if you can find the resources or the budget, to do something more like an advanced attribution model that you would get out of machine learning, using all of the same data, but putting it together in a different way. That's going to be a more accurate representation of what's going on with your digital marketing and where you should be budgeting and resourcing, which channels get the credit. We've talked through the implications of Google Analytics 4. The bottom line is don't completely switch over because you'll lose a lot of the functionality that you know and use in Google Analytics 3. What are some other, parting thoughts for people who are still, constrained down to using something out of the box because, it's cost, it doesn't kill their budget. The words are not coming out.
One other thing that I think is really important for people to do is having a backup analytics system in place that is running locally on your site, that's capturing local data. This is a package. It's an open source free package called Matomo. We have it running on the Trust Insights website, and obviously I have it running on my personal website. This, again, gives you raw data. Right. So yes, you may not be able to do the attribution modeling in here because it's even more primitive in here than it is in GA4, but you have the raw data in your own database on your own site. So even if we get to a point where, say, Google Analytics is no longer able to track people because tracking pixels just get wiped out, which is not inconceivable. Some ad blockers already do that. You can get server level data from your own server and be able to process that and turn that into usable data. So again, systems like this are open source. There's actually not that much of a technical hurdle to getting it set up. It is free of cost other than disk space on your server. And it's just always a good idea to have a backup because at the end of the day, you don't control Google, you don't control Facebook, but you do have control over your website and the data it generates.
So I think that is an excellent place for us to start to wrap up. If you have additional questions that we didn't cover, feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, you can always contact us if you have more questions. And we're happy to help too. We're happy to help you get things set up. So guys, I think that's it.
All right. We'll see everyone next week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.